In a world already teetering on the edge of conflict, the United Nations, the very institution built to preserve peace, is about to undergo one of the largest contractions in its history. The UN has announced that it will slash 25% of its global peacekeeping force, forcing 13,000 to 14,000 military and police personnel to pack up and return home in the coming months. The move comes as a direct consequence of major US funding cuts, a policy shift tied to President Donald Trump's America First agenda, and his second-term push to reshape global institutions in line with US interests. As of 2025, more than 50,000 UN peacekeepers are deployed across 9 major missions, spanning from Congo, the Central African Republic, South Sudan, and Lebanon, to Cyprus and Kosovo. These blue-helmeted troops have long symbolized international cooperation and post-war reconciliation. But now, with US funding reductions taking effect, those missions are facing drastic downsizing. According to UN officials, the organization plans to cut its peacekeeping budget by about 15%, reshaping or shutting down several operations altogether. Even the UN Support Office in Somalia, which plays a critical role in countering the Al-Shabaab insurgency, will see a reduction in personnel and logistic support. The United States has traditionally been the single largest financial contributor to the United Nations, covering roughly 27% of the global peacekeeping budget, more than any other nation, but that figure is now plummeting. In 2024, the US contributed $1 billion to peacekeeping missions. In 2025, that number will drop to just $680 million, according to UN sources. That's a reduction of nearly $320 million in a single year, leaving missions across Africa and the Middle East struggling to maintain operations. To put it in perspective, while UN peacekeeping represents just 0.5% of total global military spending, the cuts will hit some of the most fragile regions on Earth, where the UN often serves as the only stabilizing force between warring militias and civilians. Since the end of the Cold War, UN peacekeeping operations have grown exponentially. In 1990, there were only 11,000 peacekeepers worldwide. By 2014, that number had ballooned to 130,000, spread across 16 major operations. Today, that figure stands at just over 52,000, serving in 11 conflict zones across Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. From patrolling volatile ceasefire lines in Lebanon to protecting displaced civilians in South Sudan, peacekeepers have become the most visible face of the United Nations, but that image may soon fade. With the US pulling back, the UN faces what some diplomats describe as a crisis of credibility and capability. This seismic shift began in January 2025, when President Trump ordered a comprehensive review of all UN and multilateral institutions. His administration suspended or downgraded US participation in several key agencies, including UNESCO, the World Health Organization, and the UN Human Rights Council. Now, the same logic is being applied to peacekeeping. Mike Waltz, the new US ambassador to the United Nations, made it clear: Washington will not provide blank checks to global institutions without what he called a full accountability audit. In a recent interview, Waltz stated that the United States is getting the UN back to the basics, promoting peace, enforcing peace, preventing wars, and cutting out all of this other nonsense. Behind the rhetoric lies a clear strategy to shrink what Washington sees as bloated bureaucracies, while redirecting resources to bilateral and regional defense initiatives under US control. The impact of these cuts extends far beyond New York or Washington. In South Sudan, UN forces have helped protect more than 200,000 civilians displaced by civil war. In the Congo, peacekeepers support national forces fighting armed militias in mineral-rich territories areas critical to global supply chains for cobalt and lithium. In Lebanon, the UN Interim Force monitors one of the world's most volatile borders between Israel and Hezbollah. Now, all these missions face manpower reductions. For example, UNIFIL alone could lose up to 1,200 personnel at a time when tensions between Israel and Hezbollah are flaring. Meanwhile, China, the second largest contributor to UN peacekeeping, has pledged to pay its full contribution by the end of 2025, signaling Beijing's intention to fill the power vacuum left by the US retreat. With China already supplying nearly 15% of the UN peacekeeping budget and providing over 2,500 troops, analysts warn this could shift the geopolitical balance of influence within the UN itself. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has repeatedly cautioned that peacekeeping remains one of the most cost-effective tools for global peace and stability. Yet, even he now faces the reality of forced austerity. Over 60 UN offices and agencies are expected to implement 20% job cuts, part of a wider reform plan to align with shrinking resources. For the nations hosting UN peacekeepers, from Bangui to Beirut, Kinshasa to Juba, the fear is that the departure of international forces could lead to renewed violence, humanitarian crises, and regional instability. The question looming over the international community is clear. If the UN withdraws, who will keep the peace? For decades, the blue helmets stood as symbols of collective will. Imperfect, often criticized, but present. Now, as the UN scales back its reach, the world enters uncharted territory. The future of peacekeeping may depend less on multilateral cooperation and more on political will, in Washington, Beijing, and beyond. The UN's withdrawal may save billions, but it risks costing humanity far more in trust, stability, and peace itself.